Hello, I'm Kelsey, a misfit with a passion for crafting and creating. Hey there, welcome back to my little crafty corner of the internet. In today's video, I'm finally making a Christmas advent calendar countdown that I've actually wanted to create since last year, but time slipped away from me. But I'm making time this year. But before jumping into my explanation of my vision for this project, I need to show you the video that inspired the whole project for me. I found it on Pinterest and immediately fell in love with the concept of it. In this video, the maker designed a countdown where Santa falls a little closer to the fireplace below each day, eventually landing inside the fireplace on Christmas Day from the chimney tower. I thought it was such a cute idea. So of course, my brain immediately went, what if you could also do something similar, except every day you get a little treat, like candy, that drops into the fireplace at the bottom? And that's when I started brainstorming how on earth I could make something like this actually work. So here's what I came up with. I'm still making a tall tower like the Pinterest video, but mine needs to be bigger so it can actually hold candy for each day. To keep it from becoming way too tall, I decided to make it wider instead, splitting the countdown days into two side-by-side columns instead of one long column like in the original design. Just like the inspiration video, each day has a little shelf you pull, but in my version, each shelf has candy sitting on top. When you pull it out, the candy drops down into the fireplace at the bottom. The first problem I ran into was that you can't pull shelves from the top like in the original design. The candy won't fall all the way down because the remaining shelves would block it. But instead, you have to start pulling shelves from the bottom. But then I ran into a new problem. If I'm pulling from the bottom up, how does Santa end up in the fireplace on the last day? My solution was to add a completely separate center column just for Santa. So now the design is basically three towers stuck together. The two outer towers hold the countdown days and the middle tower is for Santa. Each day, you pull a shelf from one of the outer towers and the candy drops into the fireplace. Then, on the very last day, the shelf is twice as long, so it stretches across two towers. It supports Santa in the middle column and holds the candy in the last countdown column. So when you pull it out, both the candy and Santa drop into the fireplace together. At least, that's the plan. So that's the basic structure of how the countdown will work. Now onto the aesthetics. The three column towers will be hidden inside the design. I'll cover them up with two flat wooden panels, one on the front and one on the back. They'll be the same height and width as all three columns combined. These panels will give me a nice smooth outer surface to decorate. On the front panel, I'll cut out an opening for the fireplace. I'm planning to build a cute little frame and mantle around it, and of course I'll hang tiny little stockings too. That still leaves a big empty space above the fireplace, so I'll add a big Christmas wreath there. And at the very top of the tower, where there's still a bit of blank space, I wanted to add some snow that looks like how snow collects on top of chimneys. Here's the prototype I actually made last year when I was trying to figure out the design. It's made out of paper, so it hasn't held up perfectly, but you can see what I was going for. This model helped me figure out that my idea should work, and what it might look like in real life. Now it's time to turn this paper prototype into an actual wood structure. The first step was figuring out all my measurements. I already knew the front and back would be made from flat wooden panels, and of course, wood is thicker than paper. So the sides, where the little shelves get pulled out, took some real thinking. In my paper prototype, the shelves slid into tiny slits cut into the sides. But I wasn't sure I could replicate those thin slits in wood. So I started brainstorming easier ways to make openings for the shelves. That's when I thought, what if I used wooden square dowels? I could cut them into 3-inch pieces and attach them to the inside of the front and back panels, leaving about a 1/2-inch gap between them for the shelves to slide into. With that idea in place, I think I finally have all the measurements I need. And for anyone who wants the exact measurements of this build, here they are in a blueprint I sketched out for myself. I'll also link a PDF version in the description below for anyone who wants it. Oh, and one thing I almost forgot to mention, at the bottom of the 2 outer columns, I'm adding a little 2-inch tall ramp. These ramps help guide the candy so it falls right into the fireplace opening instead of getting lost somewhere inside where you can't see it. I know, this has been a lot of explanation, design details, and measurements. But hopefully it all makes sense. And now, it's finally time to start cutting some wood. To start off, I cut the front and back panels from some wood my mom had left over from a headboard she recently took apart. So luckily, I didn't have to buy any wood for that. Next, I measured out 3-inch segments along the dowels I bought and cut those on the table saw as well. I needed 8 1-inch square wood dowels for this project, but the store only had 5 in stock. So I grabbed the remaining 3 in the next size down and figured I'd make it work. Looking back, I have no idea why I chose the next size down when it was 5/8 inch, instead of just going with a 1/2-inch dowel. It definitely didn't make math any easier. But honestly, I was just being lazy and didn't want to drive to another store to get the size I actually needed. Anyway, I cut the 5/8 inch dowels into 3-inch pieces too. After cutting many dowel pieces, I laid everything out on top of the back panel to double check my measurements and plan where the small 5/8 inch pieces will go. To make the laying out easier, I drew a 1-inch grid directly onto the back panel. I knew I wanted the 1-inch dowels to go along the outer side of the build, so I placed those first. Then I experimented with the smaller dowels to see if I could use them for the inner column supports. I didn't quite have enough of the small dowels to fill the entire middle column. Specifically, I was short for the top portion. Instead of running back to the store, I cut 2 small support pieces from the same wood I used for the front and back panels. Once those were cut, I finally had everything I needed to support the inner structure. The next thing I worked on was the 2 ramps for the bottom of each outer column. I cut those from the same wood as the panels, making 4 small triangular pieces to form the ramps. Now it was time to commit and start attaching the dowel pieces. I used hot glue to stick them down to the back panel first, and then I'll go back and secure them with screws as well. To make sure the dowels were spaced evenly, I used one of the full-length dowels I had left as a spacing guide. I also used a scrap piece of wood as a guide for the middle column, so it stayed the same width all the way up. Once the column structure was done, I glued the ramp pieces together and attached one to each bottom corner. After everything was glued, I flipped the whole thing over and screwed down each dowel piece along the outer side to make sure this thing isn't going to fall apart. Before adding the front panel, I lined the inside of the middle column with cardstock. I did this to make sure that when Santa falls, he won't get caught on any edges and will slide smoothly all the way down. Next, I cut out the fireplace opening on the front panel. Before attaching it, I painted the ramps and bottom section black. Once that dried, I attached the front panel. I tried my best to line it up perfectly with the back panel. But despite my best efforts with lining it up, it still came out a little crooked. But I think it'll function just fine. Also, the wood wasn't perfectly straight to begin with, so I'm choosing to blame the lumber and not my lack of woodworking skills. Once the panel was on, the tower was a little wobbly at the bottom, so I added trim around the base to stabilize everything. Then I sanded the whole tower to prep it for painting. I painted the entire build a bright blue. I really wanted this countdown to feel whimsical and magical. I do wish I painted the big tower before adding the base trim, because that would have been easier. I painted the base trim white to finish it off. Now it was time to make the fireplace frame and mantle. Thankfully, I was smart enough to paint and stain those pieces before attaching them to the tower. Originally, I had cut 2 front panels so I could have one to go on top of the other to cover up the screws. But I ended up finding this really cute scallop trim at the craft store I'll use instead. I painted the trim red and attached it over the exposed screws using hot glue and wood glue. At this point, I'm getting pretty excited because my vision is actually coming together. Next up, the shelves you pull out each day of the countdown. I started by cutting them from the same flat wood I used for the front and back panel. I cut 24 small shelves. Yes, 24, not 25. I figured it would be way easier to build an even-numbered countdown, and since Santa comes on Christmas Eve night, my little Santa will land in the fireplace on Christmas Eve, so that just felt perfect to me. I don't know about other people, but when I was a kid, it was easier to count the days until Christmas in how many sleeps were left. So when you pull the last shelf on Christmas Eve, there's one last sleep, and Santa arrives that night. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone else, but it makes sense in my brain. After cutting the shelves, I made little shelf fronts out of popsicle sticks. And made little knobs out of wooden beads. I glued them together with hot glue, and I'm hoping those hold up over the years. Once all the shelves were assembled, I painted them in 6 different colors: light blue, light pink, lime green, a reddish purple, red, and white. And with that, I think I finally have all the wood pieces finished for this build. Now it's time for the cute design elements of this project. I started with the Christmas wreath that's going to sit at the center of everything. I made the wreath out of felt, and off camera I prepared some template pieces to make cutting everything easier. The design is pretty simple. It's made up of 2 styles of greenery. One kinda shaped like holly leaves, and the other more like mistletoe leaves. On top of those, I'll sprinkle different sized multicolored berry-like shapes. To give the leaves more dimension, I hand-stitched details on each one. And to make the berries stand out, I added little starburst stitches and tiny notch stitches using gold thread. Then I stitched all of the leaves and berries onto the wreath base, and added a few gold beads on top for extra sparkle. In the end, I think the wreath turned out really cute, and I love how well it matches the colors and vibes of the shelves. Next, I worked on the little stockings for the fireplace. Just like the wreath, I made these out of felt. They were super simple. I cut out stocking shapes from red felt, sewed them together, then glued white felt along the tops to look like fluffy fur trim. I made 3 of them and glued them hanging from the mantel. I also wanted something cute to sit on the mantel, so I made tiny felt Christmas trees. Each tree is made from 3 tree shapes, folded in half, glued together, and then topped with a gold bead. I made 3 different styles and glued them to the left side of the mantle. The last detail for this Christmas countdown was the snow top lid. Originally, I planned on making it out of wood, but then I realized felt would be so much easier and it would match the other felt elements better. So it felt right. I took some quick measurements along the top of the countdown tower, drew out a template, and cut everything from white felt. Then I sewed the side panels to the top first, and then sewed the sides together to create a box shape. And of course, a plain white felt lid would have been pretty boring, so off camera I hand stitched beads and sequins onto it, and added some silver thread snowflake designs too. I think it turned out pretty cute, and it fits perfectly with everything else. I'm getting so close to being done, but I still need a Santa for day 24. When I was at the craft store getting felt for this project, I checked out their Christmas section, hoping to find a ready-made Santa that could survive a 2-foot drop. Yeah, that was optimistic. Most of the Santas were ceramic or resin, which would definitely shatter. I did find this little guy who, yeah, absolutely had to come home with me. Just like many of the elements in this build, I made Santa out of felt. I started by sewing 2 arch-shaped pieces of red felt together to make his torso. Then I moved on to the legs. I cut out boot shapes, stitched them together, and stuffed them lightly. After that, I made little red tubes of felt to slide over the boots, forming pant legs. I added a pulled apart cotton ball to the bottom of the pants for a furry trim. Once the legs were ready, I sewed them to the bottom of the torso piece, then stitched an oval panel to close up the underside, only halfway at first so I could flip it right side out. After turning, I stuffed his torso and added a few pony beads inside to give him weight so he would land upright, then sewed the opening shut. Next came the arms. I sewed 2 arm shapes together, stuffed them, and slid them into some more red tubes to create sleeves. Again, I added cotton trim to the cuffs. Then I sewed a strip of cotton along the bottom of his torso to form the fur trim of his coat. And another along the top edge for his collar. I glued on a tiny belt made from black felt with a little yellow buckle, and attached both arms. For the head, I sewed 2 skin-toned felt circles together, left a space to flip it, stuffed it, and stitched it closed. Then I sewed his head to his torso. I made his hat from 2 long red triangles and added cotton trim along the bottom and a little cotton pom-pom at the tip. After that, I cut out his beard, mustache, and nose from felt, glued them in layers, and attached them to his face. I stitched on 2 little eyes and glued his hat folded down. Then I glued his hat in place on top of his head. And just like that, Santa was finished. Or so I thought. It turns out I got the measurements wrong when making Santa. I based his measurements off of how big the fireplace is on the inside and not how big the inner column he falls through is. Turns out he's too big and gets stuck on the inside. Which meant I now have to make an entirely new Santa. And after spending an entire workday sewing the first one, I truly didn't know whether to cry, scream, or pull my hair out. And it was so close to being done. And at that point, I just had to walk away for a while, clear my head, and emotionally regroup. But after taking a breather, I came back and did it all again to make Santa, but this time scaled down properly. Thankfully, since I already had the pattern figured out, the second Santa went much faster to make. Now here he is, the much smaller version, and this time he fits perfectly. He can slide all the way down without getting stuck, and he takes a fall like a champ. Now for the final finishing touches. I added dates under each shelf. I decided to include the dates instead of just numbering them, so it's extra clear which day you're on. Then I attached the wreath I made right in the center. I also added the words "Days Till Christmas" inside the wreath to help show that this is, in fact, a Christmas countdown. And with that, I think this project is officially done. All that's left is to fill each day with candy. I believe we're ready for the final reveal. I absolutely love how this countdown turned out. It's so fun and whimsical, and I can't wait to use it this year. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I've wanted to make this for a full year now, and I'm so happy I finally got to bring it to life. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this Christmas countdown in the comments. Was it worth building? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my next crafty adventure. And until next time, happy holidays.